Daddy, the bus driver did it again. When 6-year-old Lily got off the bus, she had that worried look on her face again, her small hands gripping her pink backpack tightly. Her dad, Mr. Thomas, had noticed it for a few days now, the way her eyes darted to the ground, like she was holding on to a big secret. But today, her voice trembled as she whispered, "The bus driver did it again." Mr. Thomas felt his heart pound. "Did what again, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching down to look her in the eyes. Lily just shook her head, looking around as if someone might hear. The silence that followed felt thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to burst. Before we dive into this story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe. Mr. Thomas decided he couldn't just let this go. With one hand on his phone and the other still holding Lily's tiny hand, he dialed 911. The operator answered with a calm voice, but Mr. Thomas's words tumbled out in a rush. "I think something's wrong on my daughter's school bus. She's scared, and she keeps saying, 'The bus driver did it again.' Sir, can you tell me more?" The operator asked gently, but Mr. Thomas realized he didn't have any more details. He felt helpless. Just please check it out," he whispered, glancing down at Lily, who was now hugging her backpack like it was her only protection. An officer came by that evening. His name was Officer Harris, a kind man with a gentle smile that seemed to put Lily at ease. "Hey there, Lily," he said softly. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me what's been happening on the bus?" Lily looked down at her shoes, fidgeting nervously. Finally, she whispered, "The bus driver says scary things." Mr. Thomas's stomach twisted as she added, "He says things I don't understand, but they feel bad." She looked at Officer Harris with wide, scared eyes, and he nodded seriously, taking notes. The next morning, as Lily got on the bus, Mr. Thomas watched closely, his fists clenched by his side. The bus driver, a tall man with a thick beard and dark sunglasses, gave a small nod as he waved at the parents. But there was something off about his smile, something that made Mr. Thomas's skin crawl. As the bus pulled away, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over him. He looked at the disappearing bus, wondering what Lily had meant by scary things. Just after noon, Mr. Thomas's phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" he answered, his heart already racing. "Mr. Thomas?" A calm voice replied. "This is Principal Evans from Lily's school. We received a concerning call from the police this morning about her bus driver." Mr. Thomas's heart leapt into his throat. "We're reviewing security footage from the bus," Principal Evans continued. "But I wanted to assure you that we're taking this very seriously." Mr. Thomas hung up the phone with his mind racing. What would they find on that footage? Meanwhile, as Lily sat on the bus, she noticed the driver glancing at her in the mirror. Every time she looked up, his eyes would meet hers, cold and strange behind his dark glasses. He whispered things, low enough that the other kids didn't hear, but just loud enough for her to catch the words. "They won't believe you, little girl," he murmured, a chilling smile creeping onto his face. Lily squeezed her backpack tighter, her heart pounding as she wished for the bus ride to end. That evening, Principal Evans called Mr. Thomas back. "We found something odd in the footage, Mr. Thomas," he said. His voice tense. "There are moments where the driver turns off the main camera feed. We can't see what's happening during those times." Mr. Thomas's hand shook. "What could he be doing when the cameras are off?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "We don't know yet," Principal Evans replied. "But we're working with the police. There will be an officer on the bus tomorrow morning." Officer Harris returned to their house that evening. "Lily, tomorrow, we're going to keep a close watch on you and all the kids on that bus," he explained gently. "You're very brave, you know that." Lily nodded shyly, looking up at Officer Harris with a small smile. For the first time in days, she felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe this strange, scary nightmare would finally come to an end. Mr. Thomas sat beside her, gripping her hand. He promised her that he'd be waiting at the bus stop, no matter what. As the bus pulled up the next morning, Mr. Thomas saw a police officer climb aboard behind the driver. He gave Lily a quick hug and whispered, "Stay brave, sweetheart." Lily nodded, trying to be strong, but the bus driver's icy gaze lingered on her for just a moment too long. She swallowed hard, feeling the tension thick around her as the bus began to roll forward, the police officer watching everything carefully. On the bus, the driver seemed more tense than usual. He kept glancing at the officer in the back, muttering to himself under his breath. Suddenly, halfway to school, the driver made an unexpected turn down a side road, causing the children to gasp, "What's going on?" One of the older kids whispered, eyes wide with fear. Lily clutched her backpack, feeling her heart race as the officer slowly stood up, eyes fixed on the driver, ready to act. As the bus rattled down the strange road, Officer Green, the officer assigned to ride along that morning, kept a close watch. His instincts told him something was off, but he stayed quiet, studying the driver's every move. When the driver made another sharp turn, heading further from the school, Officer Green knew it was time to step in. "Excuse me," Officer Green said, his voice calm but firm. "You're not on the usual route. Care to explain why?" The bus driver clenched the wheel, his jaw tight. "There's construction up ahead," he muttered, but his words felt hollow, like an excuse he prepared just in case. Meanwhile, at home, Mr. Thomas paced nervously, checking the clock. Lily should have been close to school by now, but something in his gut told him something was wrong. He picked up his phone and decided to call the school, just to ease his worry. "Hello, Mr. Thomas," Principal Evans answered, his voice steady. "We have an officer on the bus today. Just routine. Everything should be fine." But Mr. Thomas noticed a hesitation in the principal's voice. "Should be fine," he repeated, his heart skipping a beat. "Please just keep me updated," he said, trying to steady his voice. As the bus continued down the isolated road, the kids began to murmur to each other, sensing something was wrong. Lily clutched her backpack, her eyes darting from the driver to Officer Green. She wanted to feel safe, but every time the driver glanced back, she felt a chill run through her. Officer Green walked slowly toward the front of the bus, his eyes locked on the driver. "You're going to pull over at the next safe spot," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. The driver's grip tightened on the wheel, but he nodded, his face expressionless. The bus finally came to a stop on a quiet, empty road surrounded by tall trees. The silence felt thick, almost suffocating, as Officer Green moved closer to the driver. "We're stepping outside to have a word," he said firmly. The driver gave a small nod, his face unreadable, and followed Officer Green out of the bus. Lily and the other children sat in tense silence, watching through the window as the officer spoke quietly but sternly to the driver. Lily felt a mix of relief and fear. She wanted to believe the officer could protect her, but something in her heart told her that this wasn't over. Outside the bus, Officer Green spoke in a low, firm tone. "You have a choice: either explain why you changed the route, or you're coming with me to the station." The driver's eyes flickered nervously, his hands fidgeting as he avoided the officer's gaze. I just took a wrong turn," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. But Officer Green wasn't convinced. He noticed the driver's hand shaking, a telltale sign of fear. "What was he hiding?" "We'll be following the usual route back," Officer Green said, his voice like stone. "And I'll be watching." The bus began moving again, but the atmosphere felt heavier than before. The kids were quiet, sensing the tension between the driver and Officer Green, who now sat in the seat closest to the driver, eyes fixed on him. Lily felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe the officer would keep them safe. But as they continued down the road, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. She looked around at her friends, their faces pale with worry, and wished more than anything that they could just reach school safely. As the bus neared the school, the driver suddenly seemed to relax, even managing a small, eerie smile. Officer Green caught this and narrowed his eyes. "Why are you smiling?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Oh, just thinking about how easily things could have gone differently," the driver replied, his voice strange and low, sending a shiver down Lily's spine. The officer's hand hovered near his radio. He wasn't sure what the driver meant, but he wasn't taking any chances. He knew he'd need to report this as soon as they arrived at the school. At the school, Principal Evans waited at the entrance, his eyes scanning the road for the bus. When it finally arrived, he felt a surge of relief. But as he noticed Officer Green's serious expression, his stomach dropped. The children filed off the bus, one by one, but Lily hesitated, glancing nervously at the driver before stepping down. Principal Evans knelt down to her level. "Are you okay, Lily?" he asked softly. Lily gave a small nod, but her eyes were filled with fear. She wanted to say something, to tell the principal about the strange things the driver whispered, but she felt frozen, unable to find the words. Principal Evans pulled Officer Green aside after the children were safely inside. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. Officer Green took a deep breath. "That driver, that there's something off about him. I can't put my finger on it, but I'll be filing a report. I'd suggest keeping him off duty until we figure this out." Principal Evans nodded slowly. "We'll have someone else drive the kids home today." "Thank you, officer." As Officer Green watched the driver walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of him. That night, Lily woke up crying, her small hands clutching her pillow. Mr. Thomas rushed to her room, wrapping his arms around her as she sobbed. "He kept looking at me, Daddy," she whispered. "He said I wouldn't understand, but that I'd find out soon." Mr. Thomas held her close, his heart heavy with worry. "It's okay, Lily. You're safe now," he whispered, trying to comfort her. But deep down, he knew that whatever fear had taken root in his little girl's heart wouldn't disappear so easily. He vowed to find out the truth, no matter what it took. The next morning, Mr. Thomas found a note in his mailbox. It was written in messy handwriting, almost as if someone was rushing. "Stay out of it if you know what's good for you," it read. There was no signature, just the chilling words that sent a shiver down his spine. Mr. Thomas's hands shook as he crumpled the note. Who could have sent this? Was it the bus driver, or someone else involved in whatever was happening? He looked back at his house, where Lily was safe inside. He knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't back down. By midday, Mr. Thomas had reached out to the police once again. This time, a detective named Detective Mills visited their home. With sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, she listened carefully as Mr. Thomas recounted the note and Lily's strange encounters. Detective Mills nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like we're dealing with more than just a bad bus driver," she said, scribbling notes. "But don't worry, we're taking this seriously. We'll look into every lead and keep an eye on your family." As she left, Mr. Thomas felt a mix of relief and fear. He knew the detective would do her best, but would it be enough to keep Lily safe? Back at school, Principal Evans had questions of his own. He spent hours reviewing the footage they'd collected from the bus, but each time he thought he found something, the screen would go black, another gap in the recording. He scribbled down the times of each interruption, feeling his frustration grow. Someone was tampering with the evidence. As he sat back in his chair, he realized they were up against something much bigger than he'd anticipated. Whoever was behind this was clever, and they weren't going to give up easily. Meanwhile, at recess, Lily felt eyes on her. She glanced around the playground nervously, her heart pounding. She spotted a figure in the distance, just beyond the fence, a tall man, wearing a hat pulled low over his face. She knew that shape. It was the bus driver. Watching her, terrified, Lily ran back to her teacher, who quickly brought her inside. As she looked back, she saw the figure disappear into the trees. She knew then that this was far from over. The next day, Lily noticed that her usual teacher, Miss Brooks, was missing. Instead, a substitute teacher, Mrs. Klein, stood at the front of the classroom, a kind but unfamiliar face. When Lily asked about Miss Brooks, Mrs. Klein's smile faded. "Miss Brooks is taking some time off," she replied carefully. But something about her tone made Lily uneasy. Miss Brooks never missed school, especially without warning. Mrs. Klein's eyes softened as she noticed Lily's worry. "Don't worry, Lily," she reassured, but Lily couldn't shake the strange feeling that Miss Brooks' absence was somehow connected to the strange things happening around her. That evening, as Mr. Thomas was getting ready for bed, he heard a soft knock on his door. When he opened it, no one was there, but on his porch lay another note. This time, it read, "Last warning. Drop it, or pay the price." He crumpled the note in his hand, his heart pounding. Someone was watching his every move, trying to scare him away. But instead of frightening him, the note only strengthened his resolve. He glanced back at his house, where Lily was sound asleep. He couldn't give up now, not when her safety was at stake. Detective Mills spent her night poring over documents, cross-referencing every name connected to the bus company. Finally, she found a lead. The bus driver had previously been involved in a series of strange incidents in another town. A pattern was emerging, one that suggested his behavior might be more than just unusual, it could be dangerous. With this information, Detective Mills felt a surge of urgency. She couldn't risk another day passing without getting to the bottom of this. She picked up her phone and dialed Mr. Thomas. "We may have found something important," she said. "I'm coming over first thing tomorrow morning." Early the next morning, Detective Mills met with Mr. Thomas and shared her findings. "It turns out this driver has a history," she explained. "There were complaints, mysterious events, and even reports of kids going missing temporarily, only to reappear without remembering where they'd been." Mr. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying he took kids?" he asked, barely able to voice the question. Detective Mills nodded grimly. "We can't confirm anything yet, but there's a pattern. We need to be vigilant and keep a close eye on everyone involved." During recess, Lily found herself alone on the playground again, feeling the familiar sensation of being watched. She looked around and saw the bus driver in the shadows near the edge of the school grounds. Her heart raced as he beckoned her to come closer, his eyes dark and unreadable. Lily hesitated, fear prickling her skin. But then, she heard him whisper, "I have something to tell you. Something only you need to know." She turned and ran back toward her classmates, never looking back. She knew that whatever he wanted to say, she didn't want to hear it. Lily's friends started to notice the changes in her. She wasn't her usual cheerful self and often seemed distracted, always looking over her shoulder. During lunch, her best friend, Mia, reached out and put a comforting hand on Lily's shoulder. "Are you okay, Lily?" Mia asked, her face full of concern. "You can tell me if something's wrong." Lily wanted to tell Mia everything, but she didn't know how to explain it. She forced a smile and nodded, hoping her friend would believe her. But deep down, Lily knew that things were far from okay. That night, Lily was haunted by a vivid nightmare. In her dream, she was back on the bus, all alone, with the driver staring at her through the rearview mirror. His eyes were dark, filled with something sinister, and he kept whispering her name over and over. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. She wanted to scream, but her voice was stuck. As she lay there, trying to calm herself, she realized that her fears were becoming harder to escape. Even in her dreams, the bus driver's shadow loomed over her. The next morning, Mr. Thomas sat Lily down at the kitchen table. He knew she was struggling, and he wanted to give her a chance to talk openly. "Lily, I know things have been scary lately," he said gently. "But I need you to trust me. If there's anything else you haven't told me, now is the time." Lily bit her lip, hesitating. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. Finally, she whispered, "He keeps looking at me, Daddy. Like he knows something. Like he's waiting." Mr. Thomas's heart broke seeing his daughter so frightened. He hugged her tightly, promising her they'd get to the bottom of this together. Back at the station, Detective Mills continued her investigation, focusing on the missing footage from the bus camera. She requested records from the bus company, hoping to find any trace of tampering. After hours of searching, she found an odd detail. The footage was consistently missing during the exact times the bus driver had control. With this evidence in hand, Detective Mills knew they were getting closer to uncovering the truth. She prepared to confront the bus company, certain that there was more they were hiding. Meanwhile, Principal Evans had grown increasingly suspicious of the bus driver's behavior. He arranged a private meeting with Detective Mills, sharing his concerns and the gaps he'd noticed in the security footage. As they spoke, the pieces began to fit together like a dark puzzle. They agreed to keep the bus driver under close surveillance, and Principal Evans promised to take every measure to keep Lily and the other students safe. But as Detective Mills left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were up against something much larger than they realized. After school that day, as Mr. Thomas waited for Lily, he noticed a dark van parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and the driver wore sunglasses, making it impossible to see his face. But something about the van's presence set off alarms in Mr. Thomas's mind. He watched it closely, his heart racing as it followed the school bus down the street. Was this van connected to the driver somehow? Mr. Thomas took out his phone and noted the license plate number, determined to share it with Detective Mills. That night, Detective Mills devised a plan. She coordinated with Officer Green to follow the bus route discreetly. They wanted to see if the driver would take the unusual detour again, hoping to catch him in the act. The next morning, Officer Green parked his unmarked car along the route, waiting for the bus to pass. As it approached, he noticed the driver looking around nervously, as if he sensed something was amiss. When the bus took the strange turn once more, Officer Green followed closely, feeling the tension build as he prepared to finally confront the driver. As the bus turned onto a quiet, winding road, Officer Green saw his chance. He turned on his siren and signaled the driver to pull over. The bus driver glanced in his rearview mirror, his eyes wide with panic. Instead of stopping, he hit the gas, speeding up the isolated road. Officer Green radioed for backup, his adrenaline surging as he pursued the bus. Inside, the children clung to their seats, terrified as the bus swerved around curves. Lily gripped her friend's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. Back at the school, Principal Evans received a frantic call from one of the teachers. "The bus is missing," she cried, her voice filled with fear. Principal Evans immediately called Mr. Thomas, who felt his heart drop. "We'll find her," Principal Evans promised, though he felt a knot of fear growing inside him. In that moment, Mr. Thomas knew he couldn't just sit and wait. He grabbed his keys, determined to search for his daughter himself. Mr. Thomas's mind raced as he drove through the neighborhood, eyes scanning every street. He could feel his hands trembling on the steering wheel, imagining his little girl scared and alone. He kept calling Detective Mills, hoping for any updates, but she was in the middle of the pursuit, unable to respond. Meanwhile, he noticed other parents out on their porches, watching anxiously. News had spread that the bus had gone off route, and the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Mr. Thomas clenched his jaw, determined to bring his daughter home safely. Officer Green kept his distance as he tailed the bus down a narrow, winding road that led into a secluded area surrounded by thick woods. He could see the bus driver's eyes darting to the mirror, his movements erratic. Inside the bus, the children were silent, some clutching each other's hands as they watched the driver nervously. Lily took a deep breath, trying to calm her rapid heartbeat. She squeezed her friend Mia's hand, whispering, "It's going to be okay." But deep down, she wasn't sure. Despite her fear, Lily decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. She stood up and called out to the driver, "Why are we going this way? We're supposed to be going home." The driver glanced at her through the mirror, his face a mix of anger and worry. "Sit down," he barked, but his voice trembled. Lily's small act of courage inspired some of the other kids to speak up too, their voices filling the bus with questions. The driver pressed his foot harder on the gas, ignoring the pleas, but Lily could tell he was growing more anxious. At that moment, Detective Mills's phone buzzed. It was Principal Evans, who had been tirelessly following up on leads. He discovered that the bus driver had an alias and a troubling history in a nearby town involving strange disappearances. "We might be dealing with something bigger here," Principal Evans warned. "Keep your guard up." Detective Mills's jaw tightened. The stakes were higher than she had realized, and she was determined to bring everyone on that bus back safely. She radioed for additional backup and urged Officer Green to keep his distance but be ready to intercept. Mr. Thomas, still unable to reach anyone for an update, felt desperation gnawing at him. He finally pulled over, clasping his hands together in silent prayer. He prayed for Lily's safety, for her courage, and for someone to find them in time. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Detective Mills. She quickly filled him in, telling him about the secluded road the bus had taken and urging him to stay hopeful. "We're closing in, Mr. Thomas. Just hold on a little longer." Mr. Thomas gripped his phone tightly, taking a deep, steadying breath. It wasn't much, but it was hope, and he clung to it. Inside the bus, Lily and her friends huddled together, trying to think of a plan. She remembered her dad's advice to always stay calm and think things through. She noticed a window latch that looked loose and started to fiddle with it, hoping she could open it enough to call for help. Her friend Mia watched in awe as Lily worked. "Are you sure we can get out?" Mia whispered, Her voice shaking, Lily nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. I don't know. But we have to try. As the bus sped along the desolate road, Officer Green decided it was time to act. He pressed his foot on the gas, closing the distance between his car and the bus. He could see the kids moving near the windows, their faces filled with fear. He radioed Detective Mills, I'm going to try and stop him, these kids can't wait any longer. With a nod from her end, he took a deep breath. Steeling himself for what was coming, the driver could see Officer Green's car gaining on them, red and blue lights flashing. His grip on the wheel tightened, his eyes darting back and forth. He knew he couldn't outrun the police forever. He veered sharply, pulling the bus down a rough, dirt path, hoping the trees and narrow path would block the police car. The kids screamed as they were tossed side to side, clutching the seats in fear. Lily held Mia's hand tightly, her heart pounding as the bus jolted over rocks and uneven ground. She tried to calm herself, but the fear was overwhelming. Officer Green followed, tires screeching as he swerved onto the dirt path, struggling to maintain control on the rugged terrain. The trees closed in, and the path grew narrower, making every twist and turn feel like a tightrope walk. Stay with him, Detective Mills urged over the radio. Officer Green clenched his teeth, focused entirely on keeping the bus within sight. He knew that if he lost them now, they might never find the kids in these deep woods. Back at the police station, more officers were mobilizing to assist. The call had come in about the rogue bus driver, and everyone knew that time was running out. They sped towards the secluded area, radios buzzing with updates. Detective Mills, coordinating every move, felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. But she was ready, and she wasn't going to stop until every child was safe. As the bus bumped along the dirt path, Lily tried once more to open the window latch, pulling with all her strength. She felt it loosen just a bit more, and finally, the window cracked open enough to let a small gap of air inside. Help us! She yelled, her voice echoing into the thick woods. Mia joined her, shouting out the window as loudly as she could, hoping against hope that someone would hear them. Their cries faded into the trees, but in the distance, a pair of flashing lights drew nearer. Finally, Officer Green managed to block the bus at a narrow point in the path, bringing it to a stop. He stepped out of his car, weapon drawn, and shouted, "Driver! Step out with your hands up." The driver hesitated, glancing between the children and the door. But there was nowhere left to run. Slowly, he opened the door, his hands raised as he stepped off the bus. Inside, the children erupted in relieved cheers, clutching each other in joy and relief. Lily took a deep breath, her heart finally calming as she realized they were safe, at least for now. Minutes later, Mr. Thomas arrived at the scene, jumping out of his car and sprinting toward the bus. He called out, "Lily! Where's my Lily?" Lily heard her dad's voice and ran off the bus, throwing herself into his arms. Tears streamed down her face as she held on tightly, feeling the warmth and safety of his embrace. Mr. Thomas hugged her, whispering, "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now. I promise." Mr. Thomas held Lily close, her small arms wrapped around his neck as he carried her to the waiting police car. Lily could barely speak, her throat tight with emotion, but she whispered, "Daddy, I was so scared." Mr. Thomas kissed the top of her head. "I know, Lily. I was scared too. But you were so brave." He wiped a tear from her cheek, silently vowing to never let her out of his sight again. In the distance, other parents were also reuniting with their children, many of them crying tears of relief. The weight of what could have happened settled over the entire crowd, but for now, everyone was just grateful to be together again. As the families reunited, Detective Mills directed the officers to take the bus driver into custody. She approached him, her expression stern. "You're going to tell us everything," she said firmly. The driver looked down, resigned, as two officers led him to a police car. Turning back to the crowd, Detective Mills felt a sense of pride seeing the relief on the parents' faces. Yet, her job was far from over. She still needed to uncover what had driven the man to take such desperate actions. At the police station, Detective Mills began questioning the bus driver, whose real name was revealed to be Carl Burns. She learned that Carl had lost his job years ago due to reckless behavior and had been living under the radar ever since. His criminal record showed a troubling history, making the detective wonder how he'd managed to work as a bus driver without anyone noticing his past. "Why did you take the children?" she asked, watching his reaction closely. Carl stared blankly, then muttered, "I needed someone to listen, someone who'd understand." Detective Mills frowned, sensing that his reasons went beyond mere frustration. But what was he really after? That night, Lily struggled to sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the twisted expression of Carl's face in the rearview mirror, the speeding bus, and the thick trees blurring past as they were taken deeper into the woods. Mr. Thomas sat by her bedside, gently stroking her hair. "You're safe now, Lily. You're home," he whispered, but Lily's voice was barely a whisper as she replied, "What if he comes back, Daddy?" Mr. Thomas's heart ached, but he stayed with her, reassuring her that the bad man was gone. And she'd never be alone. Over the next few days, Detective Mills continued digging into Carl's past. She uncovered strange patterns in his behavior, along with multiple reports of him showing erratic tendencies. Her investigation led her to a nearby town where Carl had once lived. There, she discovered a series of unsolved cases involving missing people, mostly involving isolated places and strange occurrences. Carl's profile matched many of the suspects, and Detective Mills knew she had stumbled upon something much larger than she'd originally thought. Despite her fear, Lily decided she wouldn't let Carl's actions haunt her forever. With her dad's support, she began to open up about her experience, sharing her feelings with her friends and family. She even spoke to her teacher about it, hoping that talking would help her feel brave again. Her teacher encouraged her, saying, "You're a hero, Lily. It takes real courage to go through something like that and come out stronger." Lily felt a small glimmer of pride. She didn't feel brave, but she wanted to be. The community, shaken by the incident, rallied around Lily and the other kids. Neighbors brought food, shared kind words, and offered support to the affected families. Schools organized safety talks, and parents volunteered to monitor buses and routes to prevent anything similar from happening again. The entire neighborhood felt closer, bonded by the shared relief and determination to protect their children. Mr. Thomas was grateful for the support, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Detective Mills's investigation took a dark turn when she unearthed more details about Carl's background. She found out that his fixation on the children stemmed from a twisted belief that they would understand his pain and not judge him like adults did. Mills shuddered, realizing that Carl had been seeking something in the children's innocence that he'd lost in his own troubled life. It was a disturbing revelation, but it helped her piece together why he'd taken such desperate measures. After a few weeks, Lily felt herself growing stronger. She didn't have nightmares as often, and she started focusing on the good things in her life. She spent more time with her friends, grateful for every day she could play, laugh, and feel safe. One afternoon, her dad watched her with pride as she rode her bike with her friends, her laughter filling the air. It was a reminder that, despite everything, she hadn't lost her joy or her bravery. The school board implemented new safety policies in response to the incident. All bus drivers were now required to undergo extensive background checks and participate in regular safety training. Parents were also encouraged to volunteer as bus monitors, adding an extra layer of safety. Mr. Thomas felt a sense of relief knowing that changes were being made to prevent such a terrifying experience from happening to other children. He was proud to see his community taking steps to protect everyone's kids. In court, Carl's charges were read out, and he was sentenced to prison for his actions. The judge made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated and that his actions had forever impacted the lives of innocent children. Mr. Thomas and other parents attended the hearing, hoping that Carl's sentence would bring closure. The relief on their faces was evident as they watched him being led away, knowing he would no longer be a threat to their children. As time passed, Lily began sharing her story with other kids in her school, talking about what she'd learned from the experience. She encouraged them to trust their instincts, be brave, and always speak up when something didn't feel right. Her words resonated with her classmates, who admired her courage. For Lily, sharing her story was a way of turning her fear into strength and using it to help others. With the incident behind them, Lily and her family found a new sense of peace. Though they'd experienced fear and uncertainty, they emerged stronger, more united, and filled with gratitude for the life they had. Mr. Thomas often reminded Lily, "We went through something difficult, but it's part of our story now. And every time we tell it, we remember how brave you were." Lily would smile, feeling proud of the journey they had all taken together, as the weeks passed. Lily's nightmares became less frequent. She felt safer, knowing Carl was in prison and couldn't hurt anyone. Every night, her dad would read her a bedtime story and stay with her until she fell asleep, helping her feel calm and protected. One night, she surprised him by saying, "Daddy, I think I'm okay now. I'm not scared anymore." Mr. Thomas felt a surge of pride. His little girl had been through so much, but she was healing, becoming stronger each day. The school held a special assembly to honor Lily and the other kids for their bravery. The principal called Lily to the stage, presenting her with a small medal of courage. As the students applauded, Lily looked out at the crowd. Feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time, for the first time since the incident, Lily felt truly proud of herself. She'd faced something terrifying and come out on the other side. She looked out at her classmates and knew she was no longer just the little girl who'd been scared. She was someone brave. Detective Mills's work was far from over. The case had reminded her of the gaps in the system that allowed people like Carl to slip through unnoticed. She felt determined to prevent anything like this from happening again, vowing to advocate for stricter checks on people working with children. Her mission wasn't just about justice, it was personal now. She had seen the fear in Lily's eyes, the relief in Mr. Thomas's face. She wanted every parent and child to feel safe, and she knew she had a responsibility to make that happen. Lily became friends with some of the other kids who had been on the bus. They formed a bond that no one else could understand. Together, they shared stories, laughed about their favorite things, and supported each other when memories of the event would creep back. One of her friends, Mia, said, "We're like heroes now, right?" Lily grinned and nodded. They didn't feel like victims anymore, they felt like a team, a group of friends who had overcome something together. As life settled back into a routine, Lily found herself returning to her usual activities, playing soccer, reading her favorite books, and riding her bike. Each ordinary moment felt like a victory, a reminder of her strength. Her dad watched her from the sidelines of her soccer game, marveling at her resilience. She was running, laughing, and scoring goals, and he could see that she was slowly but surely moving past the fear. He knew that each step forward was a testament to her courage. One evening, as Lily and her dad walked home from the park, a bus drove by, and Lily felt her heart skip a beat. She squeezed her dad's hand, looking up at him. "Daddy, I still get scared sometimes," she admitted. Mr. Thomas knelt down, meeting her gaze. "It's okay to be scared, Lily. But remember, you're safe now. And you're not alone." His words comforted her, and as she looked back at the bus, she felt a strange sense of closure. It was just a bus, and she was ready to let go of the fear. As Lily grew more comfortable, she felt a strong urge to share her story with other kids, hoping it might help those who were scared or had faced tough situations. She began writing in a journal, filling the pages with her feelings, memories, and lessons she'd learned. Her teacher encouraged her to share what she wrote, and soon Lily found herself speaking at school assemblies. Her story inspired others, and she realized that sharing it gave her strength. She was turning her fear into something powerful. To help Lily continue feeling safe, Mr. Thomas started a new tradition. Every Friday, they'd go on a little adventure together, whether it was visiting the zoo, going to a park, or even just having a picnic in the backyard. It became a time for them to reconnect and celebrate their journey. These small adventures brought them closer, and Lily cherished each one. She knew her dad was her hero, the one who had never given up on her. And she was grateful for every moment they spent together, feeling loved and secure. One day, Detective Mills paid a surprise visit to Lily's school. She was there to talk about safety and to share her experiences as an investigator. When she spotted Lily in the crowd, she smiled and gave her a nod, a silent reminder of the bond they shared. After the talk, Detective Mills pulled Lily aside. "You're one brave young lady," she said. "And I hope you know that you're an inspiration to me and to so many others." Lily beamed, feeling the weight of those words. She felt proud, like she'd truly made a difference. As she grew older, Lily often thought back on her experience and the people who had been there for her: her dad, her friends, her teachers, and Detective Mills. She learned the importance of trusting the right people and knowing that it was okay to lean on others for support. she'd sometimes share these thoughts with her friends, reminding them that bravery didn't mean doing everything alone. It meant trusting others and knowing that help was always there when needed. One day, Lily decided to write a letter to Detective Mills, thanking her for everything she'd done. She wrote about how the detective's courage and kindness had inspired her to be brave, even when she was scared. Detective Mills received the letter and was deeply moved. For her, it was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing she'd made a difference in Lily's life. Late one night, Mr. Thomas sat by Lily's bedside as she slept. Watching her breathe peacefully, he felt a wave of gratitude. He silently promised that he would always protect her, no matter what. In that quiet moment, he realized that they'd both come a long way. Lily was stronger, braver, and filled with hope. And he, too, had learned the true meaning of courage through his daughter's resilience. The start of a new school year was always a little nerve-wracking, but this year felt different. Lily was excited to see her friends again and dive back into learning. She was no longer the scared little girl who clung to her dad's side. Now, she was confident, ready to embrace the future. Her teacher, Mrs. Carter, greeted her warmly when she entered the classroom. "I'm so glad to see you back, Lily," she said. "We all missed you." Lily smiled, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. It felt good to be seen as the brave girl she was becoming, not just the victim of something scary. In her new class, Lily met a girl named Emma. Emma had recently moved to town and was a little shy, but she had a kindness about her that made Lily feel comfortable. They quickly became friends, sharing secrets and laughing over silly jokes. One day after school, Emma confided in Lily. "I'm scared of something too." Lily's heart went out to her new friend. She understood fear all too well, but she also knew how to face it now. "You're not alone," Lily said softly. "And we can get through it together." They made a promise to always support each other. The annual school fair was coming up, and everyone was buzzing with excitement. Lily's class had a booth where they sold homemade cookies, and Lily was eager to help. Her dad volunteered to run the booth with her, making sure she had someone there to support her. On the day of the fair, the school grounds were filled with laughter and music. Lily was busy handing out cookies, and her dad was there, chatting with the other parents. For the first time in a long while, Lily felt completely at ease, surrounded by the joy of the fair. The memories of the bus incident seemed far behind her, swallowed up by the present moment. One weekend, Mr. Thomas suggested they go on a picnic at the local park. Lily's heart leapt at the thought. It had become one of their favorite activities, spending time in nature, away from everything, just the two of them. They packed a basket with sandwiches, fruit, and cookies, and set off on a new adventure. Sitting on a blanket under a large oak tree, Lily leaned her head on her dad's shoulder. "Thanks for always being here, Dad," she whispered. Mr. Thomas squeezed her hand, his heart full. "I'll always be here for you, Lily. Always." In that moment, everything felt perfect. As the weeks passed, Emma started to open up more. She shared her fears with Lily, and Lily helped her face them the same way she had learned to face her own. Together, they faced their fears, growing stronger and more confident each day. One day after school, Emma came up to Lily, her eyes shining. "I did it," she said, grinning. "I stood up to my bully." Lily's heart swelled with pride for her friend. "I knew you could do it," she said. "We're both brave." When the school announced auditions for the annual play, Lily was nervous at first. The thought of performing in front of everyone made her stomach flutter. But then she remembered how far she had come, and how much she'd grown. She decided to give it a try. When her name was called for the lead role, Lily's face lit up. She couldn't believe it. She had always been afraid of public speaking, but now, she felt ready. The whole class cheered for her, and even her dad was there, beaming with pride. The night of the school play arrived, and Lily stood backstage, dressed in her costume. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't afraid. She had worked hard for this moment, and she was ready to shine. When the curtain opened, Lily stepped onto the stage with confidence. The audience was silent for a moment, then erupted into applause as Lily began her lines. She remembered everything she had practiced, and each word came out clear and strong. By the end of the play, the audience was on their feet, cheering. after the play, Lily felt a rush of emotions. She had done it, she had faced her fears and succeeded. That night, she sat down and wrote a thank you letter to her dad, Detective Mills, and her teacher. She thanked them for helping her find her strength, for believing in her when she didn't believe in herself. The next day, she handed the letters to them, and each one was moved by her words. Mr. Thomas hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Lily," he said. "You've come so far, and this is just the beginning." Months passed, and Lily continued to thrive. One day, Detective Mills called her, asking if they could meet. They sat in a quiet cafe, and Detective Mills looked at her thoughtfully. "Lily," she said gently, "you've taught me something important." Lily raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "You've taught me that real strength doesn't come from never being afraid. It comes from facing that fear, and growing through it. You've shown me what true courage looks like." Lily smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you for everything, Detective Mills. You made me believe I could be brave." Lily's friendship with Emma continued to grow. They spent countless hours talking, laughing, and supporting each other. They had been through so much together. And their bond was unbreakable. No matter what challenges came their way, they knew they could face them head-on. One afternoon, they sat together in the park, watching the sun set. "I'm glad I met you," Emma said softly. "You've made me stronger." Lily nodded, her heart full of love for her friend. "Me too. We've got this, together." It had been over a year since the bus incident, and Lily's life had changed in so many beautiful ways. She was no longer defined by fear, but by courage, kindness, and a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had helped her. One morning, as she walked to school with her dad, she looked up at him and smiled. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, Dad." Mr. Thomas squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with pride. "I know you are, Lily. You've always been ready." The community decided to honor Lily and the other children who had been involved in the bus incident. They held a ceremony, inviting all the kids and their families. Lily was presented with a certificate of bravery, and as she stood before the crowd, she realized how far she had come. Her heart swelled with pride, knowing that her courage had helped others, too. She had transformed from a scared little girl into someone who could inspire change, and it was a moment she would never forget. As Lily closed the door behind her, walking hand in hand with her dad, she knew the worst was behind them. She had learned so much about herself, about the power of love, friendship, and resilience, and while the journey had been difficult, she had come out stronger on the other side, ready to face whatever challenges life might bring, always with hope in her heart and her dad by her side. Lily stood on the edge of a new chapter in her life, one filled with endless possibilities. With her courage, her dad's unwavering love, and the strength of the community around her, she knew that the world was hers to conquer. The future was bright, and nothing at all, could stop her now.